Welcome back, everyone. Today, we're doing something a bit different. We're putting just one single piece of gear under the microscope.
Yeah, not a whole rig, just one pedal.
Exactly. No massive amps, no super rare guitars this time. We're really dialing into the sound of, well, a little orange box. The MXR Custom Shop CSP-026-74 Vintage Phase 90.
And this was fascinating because it's not just, another reissue. It's more like, well, sonic archaeology, really.
Sonic archaeology, I like that. So this pedal, the CSP-026, it came out in 2008.
That's right, 2008. And it was MXR basically trying to meticulously reconstruct the original 1974 script logo Phase 90 sound.
The sound used by, absolute legends, Eddie Van Halen, David Gilmour, that sound.
Exactly, that specific texture.
Okay, so let's unpack this mission a bit. Why did MXR, feel they had to go back and reverse engineer their own pedal almost 35 years later?
Well, because the Phase 90 changed, like a lot. Over the years, production shifted, components changed, and the sound, it evolved.
Ah, okay.
So the custom shop's goal here was really specific. Get back that original 74 tone. The sources we looked at describe it as smoother, more organic, and less pronounced compared to what came later.
Right. So less in your face, maybe?
Kind of, yeah.
Yeah.
More subtle. So today, we're going to dive into how they actually did the engineer of the components.
And importantly, why this specific reissue really crystallized that whole script versus block debate for guitar nerds everywhere.
Absolutely. It wasn't just about cloning a pedal. It felt like restoring a piece of guitar history.
Okay, let's start there then. This sonic schism you mentioned, script logo versus block logo. For years, people have argued about this. What actually happened during that production change?
It's a classic story, really. The tension between, the original artistic vision and the realities of making things efficiently. The early script logo phase, the 74 era, was pretty short.
And known for a certain sound.
Yeah, a very transparent, smooth phasing. Then came the shift to the block logo design. And with that came, well, two main things, technically.
Yeah.
They added a feedback resistor to the circuit. And there were probably some slight changes in component tolerances just due to different parts being available or cheaper.
Right, the feedback resistor. What did that actually do to the sound?
Well, technically, it sends a little bit of the phase-shifted signal back into the input of the phase stages.
Okay, feedback loop.
Exactly. And sonically.
Yeah.
That created a pretty noticeable mid-range hump, boost in the middle frequencies. And it made the swoosh much deeper, more resonant, more intense.
So the block logo sound is, stronger, more obvious.
Arguably, yeah. It definitely cut through a mix better, especially live. Maybe that's why it became so common, louder, clearer in a band context. But
it wasn't the original sound.
Precisely. It lost some of that original subtlety, that transparency. It wasn't maybe a mistake, perhaps more an optimization for mass production or stage use, like you said.
But for the purists, it was a step away. And that's where this 2008 custom shop pedal, the CSP-026, comes in.
Exactly. It was designed almost by subtraction. It was defined by what it didn't have.
Meaning no feedback resistor.
Right. No feedback resistor, no associated mid-hump. The whole point of the CSP-026 was getting back to that pre-block tone profile.
Yeah.
Smooth, musical, subtle, low feedback.
That lack of the mid-boost seems key. It lets your guitar's natural tone shine through more.
Totally. It blends in, adds texture, but doesn't kind of hijack your core sound like the block logo sometimes could. That transparency is really the defining thing.
Okay, so to get that specific smooth sweep back, they really had to nail the components, the circuit itself. How deep did they go into the engineering side? It's a 4-stage phaser, right?
Yeah, fundamentally, it's a single-speed analog phaser using 4 matched JFET stages, just like the original 74 circuit.
Okay, hang on. For those of us maybe without an engineering background, JF, what is that, and how does it make the swooshy sound?
Right, good question. So a JF junction field effect transistor, it acts like a variable resistor in this circuit. Its resistance changes based on a voltage applied to it.
Oh. And
there's another part of the circuit, the LFO, the low-frequency oscillator. It generates a slow cycling voltage, usually like a sine wave. That cycling voltage goes to the JFTs. So the resistance of the JFTs goes up and down smoothly with the LFO. Each of the 4 stages uses these JFETs to slightly delay or shift the phase of a copy of your guitar signal.
So you get 4 slightly shifted copies of your signal.
Exactly. And when those shifted copies mix back with your original dry signal, well, physics happens. You get phase cancellation at certain frequencies and reinforcement at others.
And that creates the notches and peaks moving through the frequency spectrum.
Yeah.
The swoosh,
That's the effect. The notches move up and down, creating that classic phasing sound. 4 stages is kind of the sweet spot for that vintage, not too overwhelming phase tone.
Got it. And the sources really emphasized that these JFETs in the CSP-026 had to be hand-matched. Why? Couldn't they just grab modern ones off the shelf? They're probably way more consistent now.
They absolutely could have, but that was the point. They didn't want modern consistency. See, transistors back in '74 had much wider tolerances. They weren't all perfectly identical. And that slight variation, especially across the 4 stages, contributed to the kind of organic or slightly uneven feel of the vintage sweep. It wasn't perfectly smooth.
So they had to replicate the imperfection?
Exactly. MXR engineers literally took original 74 units apart. They measured everything, bias voltages, how closely the FETs were matched, how they behaved. Then they had to sort through batches of modern FETs to find sets that behaved just like those old ones.
Wow, okay. That's serious dedication. It wasn't just the design, it was recreating the behavior of aged components.
That's the key.
Yeah.
And it wasn't just the FETs. They also used other period-correct components like carbon composition resistors.
Carbon comps, you still hear people talk about those. Do they really make a difference, or is that just cork sniffing?
Well, they do sound slightly different. They tend to have a bit more noise, maybe a slightly warmer character, and they react to heat differently than modern metal film resistors. For the purists chasing that last 0.1% of authenticity, yeah, it matters. It adds to the overall sonic fingerprint.
Okay. But the controls were super simple, right? Just like the original. One knob. Speed.
Just speed. That controls the rate of the LFO, basically how fast the swoosh is. It goes from about 0.1 hertz, that's 1 cycle every 10 seconds, super slow.
Glacial.
Yeah, really subtle movement, all the way up to about 11 hertz, which is quite fast, almost like a watery vibrato or Leslie speaker effect.
And that range covers a lot of classic phase sounds.
It really does. And true to the vintage spirit, no internal trimpos to fiddle with either. The depth, the intensity, it's all fixed, hardwired to match that 74 spec they were targeting.
Okay, now we have to get into the controversial part. The authenticity trade-offs. This dedication came at a cost, right? Modern conveniences were deliberately left out.
They absolutely were. And this really divided people. The CSP-026 specifically didn't have 2 things you find on almost every pedal today.
Let me guess. An LED indicator light.
Yep. No LED and no external 9-volt DC power jack.
Battery only. Seriously, in 2008.
Battery only. 9-volt battery. That was the ultimate commitment, you could say.
Wow. Okay, the purists must have loved that. What was the reasoning?
The arguments were, well, first, that adding the circuitry for an LED could potentially introduce a tiny bit of noise into the audio path. Second, and maybe more esoteric, was that the original circuit was designed around, and maybe sounded best with, the specific voltage discharge curve of a carbon zinc or alkaline 9-volt battery, not a perfectly steady power supply.
The battery sag idea.
Something like that. Keep the signal path absolutely as simple and vintage correct as possible.
But okay, let's be real. For a gigging musician with a modern pedal board run off a power brick, a battery-only pedal is a pain.
Oh, absolutely. It's sort of a nightmare for practicality.
And playing live without an LED, you're basically guessing if it's on or off unless you can clearly hear it. Was that tiny potential sonic benefit really worth the hassle for most players?
For some, yes.
Yeah.
Especially collectors, studio users maybe. The sources do suggest that MXR saw this as keeping the signal path maximally pure. They also, apparently, didn't include the components needed for the popular script-to-block mod some people do. They wanted it to be purely script.
Surgically pure. Okay, so they were totally uncompromising on the vintage circuit, except for one pretty major thing.
Ah, yes. The concession to modernity.
They added true bypass switching.
They did, and honestly, that was probably essential for it to be usable at all for many players. The original 74 Phase 90 used FET switching.
Which was notoriously
tone sucking. Yeah. When the pedal is off, it can still dull your signal quite noticeably. True bypass switching means when the pedal is off, your signal goes straight from the input jack to the output jack, completely bypassing the effects circuitry.
So your core tone stays intact when it's off.
Exactly. So they prioritize preserving the vintage on tone, but they compromise to meet modern expectations for the off tone. Probably a smart move.
Definitely seems like it. Okay, let's talk about the sound itself then. We know it's transparent, smooth, no mid-hump. But when you actually step on the CSP-026, what's the feel? What's that moving air quality people describe?
The transparency is the first thing you notice. There's no real volume boost or drop, and your guitar's basic EQ doesn't change much. It just adds motion.
Okay.
When it's engaged, it's not like this aggressive filter effect carving out your sound. It's more like a gentle, warm sweep. It feels less electronic, less like a machine, and more like,
Yeah.
yeah, like the air itself around the amp is subtly swirling or moving.
Organic, not synthetic. That makes sense. How does it react to playing dynamics or gain levels?
That's where the script tone really shines, I think, the dynamic response. If you play clean, softly, it adds this beautiful, subtle, rhythmic shimmer. It's great for, vintage funk rhythm parts or adding texture to fusion chords, that kind of thing.
Just a little movement.
Right. But then if you dig in, or especially if you hit it with some overdrive or distortion,
Good.
that modulation becomes much more pronounced. It gets kind of syrupy, liquid. It adds this chewy, almost vowel-like quality to sustain notes in a solo.
We absolutely have to talk about Eddie Van Halen here. He's like the poster child for the Phase 90 sound. And the classic advice is put it before your distortion, right? Why is that setup so key for that sound?
Yeah, the phaser into Marshall sound. When you put the phaser before the gain, whether it's a pedal or a dirty amp channel, the phase sweep itself is getting distorted.
Okay, so the effect hits the gain stage.
Right. The peaks and troughs of the phase sweep cause the distortion to react differently throughout the cycle. It makes the distortion kind of swell and compress in time with the phase. It gives that really aggressive, almost tearing sound where the phaser feels like it's part of the attack of the note.
It's a very active, defining sound.
Totally. Now, contrast that with how someone like David Gilmour used it, say, around the Animals or the Wall era.
Right, very different vibe.
Completely opposite approach, really. Gilmour often used phasing much more subtly. Sometimes later in the signal chain, maybe mixed lower. It wasn't defining the lead tone, it was creating atmosphere.
Like a background wash.
Exactly. A wide, shimmering wash under chords, especially on rhythm tracks, maybe doubled in the studio. It adds this subtle stereo movement, almost like, light reflecting off water. It's not grabbing you by the throat like the Van Halen thing.
And the script's transparency would be perfect for that, right? It can sit back in the mix.
Absolutely. It can add that motion without drastically changing the core tone or getting in the way. You might not even notice it's there immediately, but you'd feel it if it was gone. The whole track just kind of breathes.
It's amazing how versatile one simple circuit can be, just based on how it's used and where it sits. From EVH's roar to Gilmour's shimmer.
And that musicality is why you still see players reaching for that script-style sound today. People like Josh Homme, Tom Morello, they use phase subtly sometimes to add motion without obliterating their fundamental guitar tone.
So it wasn't just about nostalgia. The CSP-026 delivered something musically useful that maybe even complex digital units struggle to get exactly right.
I think that's fair to say. There's a certain something to good analog modulation.
Okay, so let's wrap our heads around the legacy. Why does this specific pedal, the CSP-026 from 2008, still matter today, especially that original run? There are tons of phase pedals out there now.
I think it matters because it was like a statement piece. It really became a benchmark. It helped cement the Phase 90 in its original form as one of the absolute cornerstones of guitar effects. Right up there with the tube screamer, the fuzz face, the crybaby.
One of the essential food groups for guitarists.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
And the CSP-026 forced players and builders to really look closely again at how those tiny engineering choices matched FET's resistor types actually impact the final sound.
Okay, so if we were to summarize its importance, drawing from our deep dive today, what would the key points be? Maybe 4 main things.
Okay, let's try. First, it was a truly faithful, almost obsessively accurate recreation of an iconic circuit that had drifted over time due to production changes.
Right. Point 1, authentic recreation.
Second, it showed MXR was willing, at least in their custom shop, to put authenticity ahead of convenience, even if that meant, the battery-only, no LED thing.
Point 2, commitment to authenticity over features. What's third?
A third, and this is huge for the gear community, it basically created the definitive, easily accessible reference point for the script versus block sound.
Yeah.
If you wanted to know what pure, non-mid-boosted script really sounded like, the CST-026 was it.
Point 3, the reference standard for script tone. And fourth,
I'd say it just reinforced the idea that the original Phase 90 circuit is fundamentally a timeless, incredibly musical tool. It proved that sometimes simpler is better, that you don't need tons of knobs for great tone.
Point 4, timeless musicality through simplicity. That covers it well. And that initial run, the 2008 to roughly 2012 ones, they're kind of collector's items now, aren't they?
They are, partly because of that hardcore fidelity. The battery-only design especially. It wasn't the easiest pedal to live with day to day.
Which MXR seemed to acknowledge later on.
Exactly. They learned from it. They eventually followed up the CSP-026 with the CSP-101SL, that's the script Phase 90 with LED.
Best of both worlds, maybe?
Kind of. Crucially, sources say it kept the same core audio circuit as the CSP-026, the matched FETs, no feedback resistor, but they added the LED and the DC power jack.
So the pure script sound, but practical.
Exactly. You could argue the CSP-026 was the uncompromising, almost academic proof of concept, and the CSP-101SL was the version that brought that pure sound to the masses in a more user-friendly package.
But that original CSP-026, it still stands as this benchmark for analog phasing. People still compare new pedals to it specifically for that musicality, right?
Absolutely. Even with all the fancy digital multi-mode phasers today, if you want that specific warm, chewy, moving air swirl, the CSP-026 is often held up as the standard. That dedication to the historical details, even the inconvenient ones, is what captured the magic.
Which brings up a really interesting point for you, the listener, to think about as you're choosing gear for your own sound.
Yeah, this whole deep dive kind of highlights a central tension, doesn't it? The CSP-026 show that sometimes achieving the absolute purest version of a sound might require accepting certain limitations.
Like noisy vintage resistors, or only using batteries, or ditching features like LEDs.
Right, so the question becomes, if the highest fidelity, the most authentic vintage tone, demands these kinds of compromises, how much are you willing to sacrifice? What's the trade-off you're willing to make between sonic purity and modern practicality? Where do you draw that line?
Definitely something to mull over next time you're rearranging your pedal board or wrestling with a 9-volt battery clip. That's all the time we have for this deep dive into the MXR CSP-026 74 Vintage Phase 90. Thanks for joining us.
See you next time.